These videos are about regular people talking about the things that divide us, immigration, race, Trump, etc., so they might offend you. But I hope they're useful, like some videos I made about home repairs that helped thousands of people. You see, I hate doing my own home repairs. I don't want to listen to a professional home repair guy who makes it look easy. TV pundits give me the same vibe. I don't want to listen to these people. When you see them on TV, they're at work. It's their job to talk about this stuff. They're not really interested in learning from each other and fixing the problem. They sure don't ask the questions I would ask. So me and my brother, who is himself progressive, we drove to 22 cities and interviewed dozens of people who support progressive causes. And I learned this. It's our feelings that divide us. Feelings driven by personality. Some of us want to be the innovators, the trusting, the idealists. Some of us want to be the managers, the cautious, the realists. And each of us builds a fortress around our feelings that you can't break through with facts and arguments. But maybe we shouldn't try. Apparently, evolution or God or whatever made us this way for a purpose. I think that purpose is that we need each other to get the full picture. I know it works that way with other things, but we have to talk to each other. If we don't talk to each other, we won't make progress. We drove next to San Diego and talked to Dave DiVerniero, a producer and editor of TV, film, and video for over a decade, who's worked on TV productions such as No Reservations, Hell's Kitchen, and Mythbusters, and the award-winning film Patmos, Water for Life. He's also produced commercial marketing videos for some of the world's biggest brands such as Audi, Long & Foster, and Facebook, and is currently the executive producer of Black Chip Collective, which staffs video production crews in cities around the U.S. We asked him first if he had concerns about climate change.
Climate change is a really tricky subject because you've got a huge, powerful lobby on one side, like the gas, natural resource industry, who definitely does not want you to think that climate change is happening. And you've got scientists who really have no political agenda, pretty much with a 98% consensus saying climate change is absolutely happening. And not only is it happening, it's causing real major effects right now. Even with 98% consensus, 30% of the country does not believe that climate change is real.
I'm glad you brought up the fossil fuel sector because I think we have equal skepticism about academics and politicians and the media, because all three of those also have an economic stake in global warming or climate change being legitimate. I mean, for academics, the faucets just turn on from all governments around the world if you are looking for grant money to support climate change being real. If your position is you're agnostic or you're trying to prove the opposite, there doesn't seem to be a lot of grant money out there for you. So academics have an economic incentive, just like the fossil fuel industry does. Of course, politicians, we all know how much fundraising has been done off of this. This is absolutely this wonderful, the gift that keeps on giving is to tell people about climate change and to scare people into donating and we're doing good for the world, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, media, if it bleeds, it leads. So what's better than the end of the world? There's so much clickbait into this whole climate thing. So that's our skepticism is it seems like the folks on the other side are not so innocent as the way you've just described the two. How do you react to that?
Right, and I can see where your skepticism will come in, but I feel like if you're looking at pure numbers perspective, an academic wants a job. Like they're not going to get rich off of climate change, right? Where corporations who want to be able to pollute more, who find it more economically convenient to be able to pollute more and contribute to climate change, have a much stronger, let's get crazy rich, let's improve profits, financial motivation.
Okay.
And I would say that politicians generally follow the money. On either side of the aisle, they follow the money. And I think you're going to play both the centrists on the left and right who are going to kind of play a little bit agnostic. Although NASA, who's been studying climate science basically since it's existed, has very clear reports on how climate science has changed, how it has continually digressed into the point where we're at now. And maybe you can question NASA's motivations, but I think if you have a little bit of scientific background, you can there's a ton of reports you can do your own research on, and you can find that they are scientifically not only accurate, but done peer-reviewed and done extremely well.
Sure, and you do. I've gone and looked at the guys who are both most pro and most con on climate change being anthropogenic, right? You can find reputable scientists, people who have studied this for decades, teach at MIT, very strong credentials. They haven't bought into the ICCP's report. They're not in the ICCP. And they're contrarians when it comes to climate change. I mean, they strongly believe that there is climate change going on. Their doubt is whether it's being caused by man. And also their doubt is whether some of the more dire predictions are really reasonable. So I've been able to find, to my satisfaction, that there are reputable people who disagree. I've tried to read what they've said, and I've tried to also read what the folks who are big fans of it are, like Michael Mann and whatnot, who are big fans of anthropomorphic climate change. And I see that there is enough room to doubt. Have you looked for the people who disagree with the climate change alarmists?
Absolutely. And you use the word alarmist,
yes.
And I think absolutely there can be people with,
if you can use
predictions.
Denier, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Alarmist is fine.
Sorry.
Now,
you're right. That's not fair. I shouldn't use alarmist.
No, you can absolutely. There's a range, right? There's a range of predictions, and the people who are on one end are maybe a little bit alarmist, and maybe their predictions are a little bit pessimistic, and that's not quite the case. But I have also seen some of the people who have credentials and have an opposing view, but there are so few of them, and I don't really buy their position, just because if you have 1 million people on anything, you're never going to get 100% to agree on anything.
That's a fair point. These guys could be crackpots.
And I don't want to say crackpot, because like they're probably coming at it with a certain level of scientific method, but largely the ones I've encountered, their arguments are usually debunked in, like, I guess we would be civilians, right? So we're not scientists.
Yeah, right.
Our background is limited, but when you have the vast majority saying one thing, and assuming there's equal pressure on both sides to get people to agree with a particular point of view, when you have 98% saying this is definitely happening and the tiniest little percent saying no, it's not, absolutely we should listen to these people, but we should really, with a certain amount of rigor, investigate what they're saying. Okay,
good. And so to your satisfaction, they're the majority, and that's where your position is.
Absolutely. My position is not only that I have been completely satisfied that climate change is caused by man, but I think climate change almost detracts from the rest of the environmental discussion, because that's not the only environmental problem. I mean, clean air, clean water, 100 other things are all part of the discussion, and I think climate change is a little bit overshadowing them, because it can be truly catastrophic, but these are all important discussions, and they affect our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. Okay, good point, good point. And just so you know, I'm agreeing with you, because I don't want to argue with you over details. I don't believe about that 98% figure. To my satisfaction, there's enough ambiguity over whether that research was done properly or not, as to whether that's the actual stuff. But let's not argue about that, because we could just do that all day long.
Yeah.
But we're both, to our satisfaction, we are defending our positions based on the research we've done.
Right.
Okay, good. Here's another objection that comes from the conservative circle. History remembers that from the 40s to the 70s, all of the experts thought the science was settled about how to fix what I guess was called the urban renewal problem, where there are people that didn't have affordable housing.
Right.
And their solution was to build these giant high-rise apartments in inner cities, the projects. Now, there's absolutely no ambiguity how much horrific pain that's caused. And they're all being torn down now. It was a big debacle. There were some naysayers at the time that said, no, go with 2- and 3-story housing. They were completely ignored, because all the architects, all the social scientists, everybody involved, the politicians, all wanted these giant high-rise projects. So do you see our skepticism in when folks are saying the science is settled about stuff like that? And does it give you pause to think when you see some of these other debacles that were based on so-called settled science?
I think you have a good point, because it is like every 10 years you're like, coffee's good for you, coffee's bad for you. Like these are things that we hear all the time. And I'm not saying we should ever believe the majority about anything, because the majority can be wrong a lot of the time. But I think it's more based, again, on individual research. And at some point, if you don't have the personal background to either understand or do your own research, you have to trust someone. Mm-hmm. And I trust the motivations of people who are scientists more than I trust the motivations of people who are politicians. And let's not say 98%. Let's say that number is wrong. Let's say it's 90%. Let's say it's 75%. If 75% of scientists say one thing and 50% of politicians say another thing, I'm going to believe the scientists.
Okay, fair enough. You just mentioned motivations.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that just seems way too coincidental for folks on my side of the argument is that we know that since like the mid-70s, there's this whole kind of anti-industrialization lobby that has just been trying to roll back the clock with regard to, industrialization, mechanization, manufacturing, whatever you want to call it, big power.
Mm-hmm.
They've been actually succeeding in getting, hydroelectric dams to be torn down so that we return to, Mother Gaia or whatever. There's all kinds of pressure to try to go back and do less industrialization. And this climate change situation seems to be just a Christmas-wrapped present for those forces in society that would like us to stop being so industrial. And
you're talking about the powerful hippie lobby. Is, I think, who you're talking about.
Well, but see, the hippie lobby turned into the academic lobby, which then turned into the, the Democratic Party lobby. I mean, there's some big forces behind this. And none of them like the Union Carbides and the Chevrons of the world. And they've been trying every trick in the book to get those guys to be on the decline and, get a more holistic, Tom's Shoes kinds of Apple, computer kind of a corporate entity to dominate the world, so to speak. And it just seems too convenient that, here at this point in time, when a lot of their arguments, never really kind of got any traction, all of a sudden we have this wonderful instance in which we have a climate ending or an earth ending, what do they call it? Extinction level event, yeah. And oh golly, you know what? But it just so happens that the solution for this is we need to do less industrialization. So you see our skepticism.
I can see how that could be a vehicle for those people, but I find those people very fringe.
Okay.
That we need to return to Mother Gaia is a very fringe position. I think you will agree that not a ton of people hold that. And I think what we have now is a focus more on finding alternatives, like alternative power through solar and wind and certain level hydroelectric.
Okay.
I did a lot of work with Conservation International. Mm-hmm. This is a nonprofit, and their focus is about getting people to live in harmony with nature. And maybe that sounds a little hippie, and it maybe sounds like returning to Mother Gaia, but their focus is not changing your quality of life, but adjusting technology like alternative power sources so you can live the same quality of life without harming the environment. Not all environmental concerns are about climate change. And things like deforestation and having clean water and having clean air are things that we tend to now associate with climate change. And even if you're part of that 30% who does not believe that climate change is caused by man, we have a finite number of resources. That's not in debate. And at some point we are going to run out, and we need to start now on solutions for that problem and keeping our air and water clean, completely separate from the entire subject of climate change.
Okay, good. Fair enough. Are you concerned about income inequality? in the country?
Absolutely, I'm concerned about income inequality.
Okay, tell me about it. What concerns you?
The picture is pretty clear since like the 50s that the middle class has been shrinking, the lower class has been continually getting poorer, and the very top percentage has been getting continually richer. I don't know if there's any debate about that, but I think pretty clearly in income statistics you can see this is a trend, and maybe we disagree about the causes, but I think we can agree that this is a thing that's happening.
Okay. Would you be more in favor of something that was fairer in that it shared the wealth, something more like communism or socialism than capitalism?
So I think communism is way too far, and I think you have a very hard time having communism without fascism. And socialism has gotten a bad rap in this country. I think people fear a larger government because if you've ever been to the DMV, you know the government's not good at stuff. The government is not good at stuff. But I think certain socialist programs just make sense. I would say healthcare is absolutely, universal healthcare is absolutely one of them. Transportation, the roads and the railroads make a good deal of sense as well.
Okay. Well, I guess you're not endorsing socialism. You're not endorsing.
Really.
You're saying that there's some things that just should be the role of government.
Right, we all pay in, and we all reap the benefits. And maybe for somebody who makes $3 million a year, you're paying a lot more in than somebody who makes $20,000. So it does spread the wealth around by the very nature of paying taxes. People are sometimes a little bit afraid of a progressive tax because if you're making a lot of money, you pay a much higher tax percentage, you're in a much higher tax bracket, but you're taxing disposable income. Right? We don't want to tax money people need to live. So the more money you make, the more disposable income you have, and therefore the more you should be taxed on it.
So it sounds like, capitalism's okay with you, but you would just like to see some more, some safety guards or some safeguards in place.
A social safety net I think is very important, but I think a social safety net helps people in the very lowest part of the economic structure. I think we need to concentrate on policies that are going to help the middle class remain strong and continue to grow. Things like healthcare, like if you don't have to worry about where your healthcare is coming from, if you get sick, it opens you up to a certain level in the way you deal with things economically. In particular, we're seeing a huge move towards the gig economy. And this is something I personally have a lot to do with. I was a freelancer for a decade. I deal with freelancers every day now. And the estimates put freelancers at like 50% of the economy in 2 or 3 years. And I think that's something we've just not reckoned with yet. When you get 50% of the population who's working for themselves, who's self-employed in an economy that kind of dictates that your healthcare comes from your employer, there's a major problem.
I hear what you're saying, but back before insurance was tied to your job, insurance was still tied to your money. So it was still you. It was your earning ability that determined how much insurance you get, how much health care you get, the quality of it. Now it's tied to your job. So better job you have, better health care generally. My fear, and a lot of conservatives' fear, is we are going down a road that's taking us more and more like Europe. Some people love that, but Europe's not particularly kind of has the reputation of being as hardworking as America. And I think it's because, in Europe, you get exactly what you want. You talked about the gig economy. You're absolutely right. If you do have health care and it's coming from the government, well, that's one less reason for you to have to work. I know in particular right now, I'd retire tomorrow if I didn't have to get health care, right? Because a lot of people, I recall a guy at work that said, if Obamacare passes, I'm retiring. And it's like, wow, that's great. Well, hold on a second, that's not great. Aren't you a little worried that by doing that, by making us a little bit more like Europe, it does kind of change the American character?
The American character, that's an interesting perspective. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that there's any hard data saying that Americans work harder than anybody else. I think we have a long work week, and I think sometimes we're a little bit abused in our employer situations, but I don't know that Americans do work harder than
Yeah, I
anyone
mean,
else.
it may be a myth. I just know my colleagues overseas get, I think their first year they get like 5 weeks of vacation. Second
Oh
year
yeah,
they
I know
get 8.
France. It's like a 30-hour work week and like
right.
summers off. And
But, I mean,
why wouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't we want summers off if our economy can handle it?
Here's the thing. Because there's, in all ventures like that, there's unintended consequences. And it worries me a bit that we trade these things that have worked for things that sound good. And we don't really know what the unintended consequences are going to be.
Okay, but I would say, I think England's probably a good comparison because they are like us in a lot of ways, except they have universal health care. But I don't think you have more people living off the system, and people tell me this is the same with universal basic income. You still have people working just as hard. I'm not sure I 100% believe that, but with health care, now this is probably going to be, again, a value judgment, but I think it's a basic human right. If you go to the hospital, nobody's going to let you die. So we're paying for people who get sick, whether they can pay or not, regardless of how we structure it. I don't think having more freedom in your financial life is a bad thing. And I think it's been tested in Europe. And yes, there are European countries who have not done great, but they're generally tied to something totally different, like the economic collapse in Greece because of the euro and the unemployment in Spain. But you look at England, and how long have they had universal health care now, but still doing financially strong since about the 60s.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. The Trump victory a year ago seemed to have really caused a lot of people to be very, very upset. We always bounce back and forth between these kind of big government and small government things. And we were pretty depressed. Conservatives were depressed when Obama won the first time and then the second time. But, we didn't go rioting in the streets. What do you think it is about the Trump election that's so different this time?
I think if you compare Trump to any previous conservative, there's a huge departure. There's a huge departure in basically everything. I think the reason that Trump both got a base and has so many people so vehemently against him is because he's not anti-establishment in the way Bernie Sanders is anti-establishment. He's anti-establishment, and I don't mean to be aggressive or contrary with this, but because he's incompetent, because he does not have any government experience, because through the things that he's said, I glean that he doesn't really know what he's doing at all. And I don't think it's the victory. I think the victory surprised a lot of people, but I think it's him as a politician that is the reason a lot of people are very upset with his victory. And I think if you had Mike Pence, if he had dropped out halfway through the race and Mike Pence had taken over, people would be depressed, but I don't think you'd have this huge resistance movement and just a very powerful disapproval rating against him if it had been virtually any other conservative candidate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that's fair enough. We haven't had anybody who excites his base as much as Trump does. So, by the same token, I guess that would also antagonize his political opponents more severely. Believe me, I mean, it's no exaggeration, but since Trump was elected, every day's like Christmas. And the best thing is, he's making the Republicans look like a bunch of jackasses, which I love. I love the fact that these guys have promised stuff for decades and just whiffed and whiffed and whiffed and whiffed and whiffed. If you do think about the Trump voter, what do you think is motivating them? Where do you think they're coming from?
I think Trump talks the right game. I think he knows, and maybe this is years as a showman, like he was very popular entertainer before he became the president for some reason. But he knows what to talk about. And the economy. I think you saw it in the Democratic primary with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, presumptive nominee from the get-go. But Bernie Sanders gained so much ground because he was a one-note guy. He was economy, reduce the economic disparity between the poor and the wealthy. And I think Trump talked about the exact same thing. Obviously, their methods are very different, but I think he's talking the right game. I do not remotely believe that he is going to do the things that need to be done to actually get that to happen.
What would you think if he does do the things that he
so
claimed he
in
would
broad
do?
terms, if he was actually able to create jobs, if he was actually able to reduce income disparity, I would 100% be behind that. But the tactics that he's taken don't lead me to believe that at all. The current tax bill, in whatever form that it is now, really makes me think it's only going to make things worse.
Fair enough. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was Dave DiVerniero in San Diego. I'd like to thank him for taking the time to talk with us. I hope you consider supporting the series by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks.